Hello everybody, we are back. In this video we are going to talk about BIP-110, what happened after the mandatory signaling block height. So BIP-110 or RDTS was or is the project trying to reduce arbitrary data storage in Bitcoin. So let's see what happened and what's next. So first of all, yes, there was this block height after which miners were basically forced to signal in favor of this soft fork. Because for a long time, for the 6 months before, there was another mechanism to activate the soft fork. That was miners were supposed to, start signaling in favor, voluntarily signal in favor of this fork. And if 55% or more of the hash rate was supporting the soft fork that would start activating these rules to reduce possibilities to store data in Bitcoin, then the rules to enforce that change would be activated. But that didn't happen. So we arrived at this other activating condition that was at a certain block height. Miners were forced basically to support this chain, this soft fork. If they don't signal for the change, then all the nodes agreeing with the rules, with the new rules, so what I call here BIP-110 nodes, these nodes would reject blocks mined by the miners. And we were waiting until this block to know what was going to happen. We couldn't really know for sure, even though, it didn't look good for the soft fork, because not only they didn't reach 55%, but also the signaling before the block height in the last basically averaging window was only 2.5%. But still, we didn't know, because there were some arguments about how the miners could potentially collude or anyway wait until the first block height to start signaling because they didn't want to show. I don't know. I mean, this was pretty much a little bit far-fetched game theory argument, but it's true. We had to wait to see what was going to happen for real. And what happened is that the first block at the start of this mandatory signaling time was mined by a big mining pool that ignored this signaling rule. Said, no, I keep mining as I was always mining. I don't care. Bitcoin keeps going as is. And that's what happened. So this first block was not signaling. And then the BIP-110 nodes looked at this block and said, well, this is not valid. Because according to my client rules, the BIP-110 software, this block is invalid. So I reject it. And after some time, there was another mining pool, Roughnecks, that indeed mined a block signaling BIP-110. And then finally, the BIP-110 nodes had finally a good block. So at that point, we had really a chain split, because there was one chain enforcing the rule, you must signal for BIP-110, and another chain that was keep going with Bitcoin as usual, like nothing happened. And there were these two forks creating a chain split. Then what happened is that at that point, we knew that Antpool was not supporting BIP-110. We knew that Roughnecks was supporting BIP-110. We didn't know about the other miners. Very fast, it was clear that all major mining pools were just keep going as usual. They completely ignored BIP-110, or they didn't want to support it. It was an active change that miners had to do to support BIP-110, and they didn't want to signal. I mean, that's what happened. It's very clear. And the hash rate supporting the standard chain was much higher, because in the end it was only Roughnecks who wanted to support BIP-110 with hash rate, not just by words or spinning up new nodes. So these are the stats as of yesterday, basically 6 days after the split. The standard chain is 792 blocks in above or beyond the BIP-110 chain. So there is really, it was never in doubt that Bitcoin will stay as is. The standard chain would not be disrupted in any way. There was no wipeout risk. Absolutely. Basically, it was a non-event, pretty much. And Roughnecks then mined another block. So we had 2 blocks on the BIP-110 chain. That's on the day of the split. And then they stopped operations. They stopped operations because effectively at that point, you are burning hash rate. You as a miner, when you mine this chain and you don't know if there is a future for this chain, if you can eventually profit from it, selling at least part of the Bitcoin you mined, the BIP-110 Bitcoin you mined, then you are effectively, burning resources. And they stopped. But after some time, they came back because there were news on this chain. I will talk about the plan for a proof of work change. So we have that to keep in consideration. But yes, the standard chain keeps going as is with pretty much the same hash rate, other than what Roughnecks was providing. All right, so we have this hard fork. That's the plan now. And this hard fork is happening basically right after. It's going to continue the history of the BIP-110 chain. So there is not going to be another chain split on the standard chain as is. BIP-110 basically rejects the standard chain as legit chain in any way. They have their own chain. The proponents of the BIP-110 initiative basically see this chain as Bitcoin. It's just now very slow in confirming new blocks because the hash rate is very low. And then the difficulty is the same. It's basically the same that was inherited from the original chain, because you need 2016 blocks to update the difficulty automatically. So that's going to take years, and it's obviously impractical. But from their point of view, Bitcoin is live, and this is the chain. Now, for the chain to start mining at a normal rate, you have to do something. You cannot just wait for the mining difficulty update. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to do a hard fork. It's going to reset difficulty and introduce a new algorithm. So the difficulty will be lower or anyway reset. The idea is that even if the hash rate is much lower than what you have on the other chain, the other Bitcoin chain, what most of the world calls Bitcoin, you want to have blocks mined at a regular rate, like the usual 10 minutes per block would be a good target, obviously. And then there is the other question, what algorithm to use for the proof of work? Because you also want to change that, because you really want, at that point, a clean cut from the other Bitcoin fork. And there is this idea that Bitcoin, the other Bitcoin, was captured by miners. So you want to fire the miners. You want to be sure that they will not be there to disrupt your chain or capture the chain again, right? So you cannot have the same SHA-256 algorithm with all the other miners with their ASICs that could put a small percentage of hash rate to disrupt the chain and so on. Anyway, I guess you want a clean cut, and there was this idea to select another algorithm. But the question is, which one? Because you kind of want to be neutral. You don't want someone to push a new proof of work algorithm because maybe they have other reasons or specific reasons. They think they can profit from a specific choice. It would be a bad look. So the idea was to select it randomly. And Blake2B, particularly the version optimized for Siacoin mining, was selected. And it was selected randomly using a hash from a testnet block. It was debated whether it could be manipulated and whether it was manipulated. But at the end of the day, this is the algorithm. And yes, the chain will restart from the current RDTS, meaning BIP-110, this reduced data temporary soft fork chain. Now, what happened is that what was supposed to be a user-activated soft fork, what does it mean user-activated? It means the nodes running BIP-110 were indeed enforcing the soft fork. That happened. Why I say failed here? Because ideally, you don't want a chain split. You wanted this to be Bitcoin, only one Bitcoin, upgraded with the rules enforced by the users, the node runners alone. And this didn't work, and some might say, so UASF never works. That's not true. It's case by case, and it's not like we have an immense data, immense statistics. It's not something that happens every day. But I want to make very clear that even if you believe that number of node runners is the most important thing, they didn't have like a majority of node runners running BIP-110. Okay, now I want to talk about what this means, what we learned, because I also got questions on what we learned from this event. So, for instance, a question was like, if BIP-110 failed, does it mean that Bitcoin does not have a spam problem, or spam problem is not fixable? Like, what does it mean? Were the BIP-110 leaders right in being worried about spam and so on? Yes, there's no question here. Spam is real. You can try to attack Bitcoin spamming. And the good news is that Bitcoin is already limiting spam, because nobody who cares about Bitcoin likes spam. Spam by definition is an attack. I mean, at least my definition, the stricter definition of spam, because spam may also be anything I don't like, or even anything that doesn't directly benefit me, But yes, Bitcoin is already limiting spam. And the bad news, what we basically learned, or we knew, but it was then explicit from this failure, is that BIP-110 is not a technical solution to limit spam. Honestly, against really adversarial spam, doesn't do anything. BIP-110 doesn't do anything to protect Bitcoin from the most adversarial spam. Like, if you want to really attack Bitcoin, creating transactions that abuse the network in such a way that, for instance, create UTXO bloat, increase the state for no reason, just to attack Bitcoin, this would still work with BIP-110. So BIP-110 was maybe a way to create some nuisance for some projects relying on Bitcoin and data on Bitcoin for purposes that go beyond just sending and storing Bitcoin. It was a nuisance, but there were going to be workarounds, and workarounds were already proposed before BIP-110 mandatory signaling. It was already clear this is not doing pretty much anything from a technical point of view, and I will get back to this. From a technical point of view, it was not doing almost anything. There are nuances we will talk about. And it's clear that spam is better fought with policy. If you want to limit spam, transaction relay policy is good for that, because it's something that is much more agile. And if there are workarounds, you can limit workarounds with policy. You don't want to limit workarounds with constant changes to consensus. It's not happening. Bitcoin is not doing that. And this answer was very clear. We are not changing Bitcoin to try to limit our workarounds that will be gamed immediately again. And it was done. So it was obvious this was not a technical solution. Not even a good technical solution. It was not doing anything to limit workarounds. All right? There are things that BIP-110 does, right? There are technical things that effectively do something. So for me, the most important thing is the op return thing. There is something there. So op return was limited by policy to 80 or 83 bytes, and then this policy limit was removed because effectively considered useless, because yes, policy is good for workarounds, but at the end of the day, you can go straight to miners, and if miners mine it, the transaction gets in. But the fact that BIP-110 is enforcing by consensus a very low, like 80 bytes op return, has a technical effect, at least. And what this is doing is avoiding that someone can say that there is a place in Bitcoin that doesn't have any other purpose than storing arbitrary data, large amounts of data, continuously. So all this contiguous byte discussion, there is something there. But I already don't like when I start saying someone can say that's the purpose. Say to whom? And why would that be important, what anyone thinks was the purpose? Because Bitcoin is code and consensus in a network defined by code. There is no real purpose embedded in the code. And there is, so yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. I don't believe it has an important weight, but I don't know. This is something, I would say, that has some sense at least. What else? And also, yes, it was not a technical solution, but it's also true. What BIP-110 wanted to do wants to do is also give a signal and make it clear that anything that is not a monetary transaction or that is sending and storing Bitcoin is not allowed and is not tolerated. So it was a signal, it was a clear statement of protecting the purpose. Again, I don't resonate much with these arguments, but that's part of this argument. That's part of the objective of BIP-110, and I guess that was achieved, and that's real. It's not technical, but it is real. Now, another question is, are miners essential point of failure? Did this event reveal that big mining pools control the network and basically they decide? And related to this question there is also, what if the miners instead decided to support BIP-110? What would have happened? Then, this was a soft fork, right? So if miners were like signaling for the chain, starting from the mandatory signaling block height, then we would have had a soft fork pushed by a majority of the hash rate. What typically happens in that case is that you have only one chain, and Bitcoin basically upgrades from the previous version to a version in which you don't have these fields to store data. But what I want to say, Bitcoin would have continued normally. It looked like nothing happens, also because technically pretty much nothing would have happened anyway, because people would have continued doing inscriptions and such. But yeah, it would have been only one chain. That's what normally happens when a soft fork has a majority of the hash rate in support. Of course, there is always a potential exception that there is some minority hash rate that really hates the soft fork, and then they create a new counter fork and reject the soft fork and create a chain split anyway. So it's a bit annoying when I hear hard fork used as chain split, like hard fork equal chain split, because it's just wrong. So, but anyway, that's what would have happened. What I want to say is that it really can look like miners decides what is Bitcoin, but I think that's wrong. And that for me, what miners do is really the last step, and it's more a consequence of support or not support that was already expressed by the network, meaning all the stakeholders in Bitcoin. Network equal everybody who cares about Bitcoin. And it's hard to measure this support or not support. Well, in this case, honestly, it was easy. You don't measure it, but it was kind of obvious that there was no economic weight. Zero, pretty much zero economic weight for the soft fork. So it's hard to measure, but I would argue that what miners do is the measurement, right, of the support. So yeah, hash rate followed economic weight. There was zero economic weight. And I'm not going to talk about economic nodes and nodes because that's annoying, again, about definitions. And it's really, you enter this discussion on debate on words when the truth is honestly clear. There was not enough economic weight. People actually caring about putting their money where their mouth is, and exchanges didn't support this. Nobody really invested in it in any way, pretty much. We did see a lot of node runners, okay? So people believing in this and spinning up nodes. So buying boxes to run nodes and, increasing this node count. That happened. It was not all civils, all right? There is a movement of people who want to support BIP-110, and what they could do about it is running new nodes. But that was not enough. And there was honestly this very wrong, false belief that was going to be enough. And that was pushed. And a lot of people apparently believed in it. Anyway, let's move to another question. Can we expect more contentious forks in the future? And in my opinion, not really. I don't expect many more, or any, honestly, in the near future, chain splits. And it's because I don't expect Bitcoin to change a lot, first of all, in the near future. There are changes, there are soft forks that make sense, and I also believe that they will be done in the next years. But I expect them to be pretty much consensus, like nobody will argue against. And why is that? One is because Bitcoin changes slowly and only when absolutely necessary, or only when extremely obvious that there are only good sides and not drawbacks. So that's not a good recipe for contentious forks. And also all the next upgrades that are planned or anyway discussed, they're so technical. They're super technical. And they're only technical, honestly. So BIP-110 was more than technical, also because technically, honestly, was not doing anything. Nothing. Like, technically as in the effects of what you can do with Bitcoin. If you talk about purpose, yeah, there were some technical changes that might inform what is the perceived purpose and what you're allowed to do or not. But that's a second layer, right? The changes that are coming with consensus cleanup and cross-chain, cross-input signature aggregation. Script restoration, maybe not. Script restoration, maybe we go again into purpose, because that's adding more programmability and more flexibility and layer 2s and so on. But BIP-110 was much more cultural and emotionally loaded, also because it became extremely polarized, the debate, and you had good community leaders, effective community leaders on the BIP-110 side. And they created this movement, the plebs versus the sweet corners. It was really super emotionally loaded. And that's good ingredient for creating a contentious fork and chain split. But this is unlikely to happen again. Now, one exception. Yeah, I talked about script restoration or renaissance. But there is another exception that is more clear, because this is going to be, again, really pushing into what are your core beliefs and your priority for what Bitcoin should preserve as properties. And that's the quantum question, and specifically what to do about these lost coins, unmigratable coins, most importantly, unmigratable and unrecoverable. What are you going to do about those coins? That's going to be a question. Are we going to burn all these P2PK, just a bunch of key coins? Or are we going to let them available for quantum theft or quantum mining? Big question. Potentially chain split. I would say still less likely that you have two long-lasting versions at comparable success in terms of market cap. But we'll see. If there is one exception, it's probably this. I also got this question on why would the leaders of BIP-110 push this change and this project, despite it was very clear that it was going to fail. And why people would say very clear? Well, because the miners had 6 months or more, more than 6 months since December last year to do the normal thing to activate BIP-110, that is reaching the 55% threshold of supporting hash rate, which, by the way, it's dangerously low, 55%. But okay, that was the parameter. And we always were at 0, 0, 0 for months, then 1, then 2 in the last window. It didn't look good. So why would the leaders keep pushing on this? I got this question. And one is, first of all, likely failure for you. So the proponents of BIP-110 were always signaling and acting as if this is going to obviously work, right? They were on the completely opposite spectrum here, end of the spectrum here. In their opinion, their publicly stated opinion, obviously miners would flip the bit and support the BIP-110 through signaling as soon as or immediately before the mandatory signaling was going to happen. So they acted as if obviously this is going to work. So this is invalidating the question because they didn't see the likely failure. They were super convinced it was going to work. At least that's what they said. That's what they said. You can think that they were lying, but I wouldn't go there. There is no need to go there at all. And they thought this was going to work. It's a possible explanation. Second, what if they didn't really think that this was going to work? Maybe not 99% success. Maybe they were thinking 10, 20, which is still worth pursuing, I would say. Then there are other good reasons to keep pushing, even though you think it's low probability. It just works as a soft fork. And one was send a message. And that was one of the explicit reasons for this soft fork, was to make very clear what's the purpose of Bitcoin. And please stop this drift over time with people in the ecosystem starting accepting slowly that Bitcoin can be used also for other things, that is not just sending BTC. If you are worried about this drift, you have to send a signal. And of course, the best way would have been to activate BIP-110, because then signal received. But whatever you can do, it's still probably worth doing. And there was also this cultural fight, or anyway, this worry that Bitcoin is captured by the Bitcoin core developers. And this was, again, a fight to expose them. So there was this purpose. This makes sense that they wanted to do. And 3, it's also possible that actually they always thought that the realistic plan was to have a hard fork. It was never going to work as a soft fork. Maybe they thought that, but they couldn't say it in public. So it made sense to push BIP-110 in this way and try everything they could do, or at least show that they tried and they believe in it, show it. But then get ready, have the community ready, BIP-110 node runners ready to start a hard fork only when needed. That is now. And now you either hard fork or you don't want to have one block every 2 days, right? And fourth is incentives. And there was this belief that if we have a big amount of nodes running BIP-110, then everybody will be forced to follow us, and miners will be forced to follow us just because we have a lot of nodes. So you should buy a node and run a node. So I don't know. Okay, in conclusion, Bitcoin changes. What we learned or got confirmed is that Bitcoin changes only when undisputable, only when the change must be done, or when there is nothing against the change, nothing. There are clear, so you either have a very, very clear upside with no meaningful new risk, and this, this can take years to decide. There are soft forks that are ready, okay? And there is upside, but is it really necessary? Are you really sure that there is no drawback, no risk, so it's safe, and there is no new spam vector, for instance? Because yes, we care about limited spam. Only when you get all that, then you're ready for a change. The other reason for a change is addressing an existential risk, okay? So when that happens, Bitcoin will change. And an example is quantum readiness, for sure. So if CRQCs are coming, then Bitcoin needs to do something about it, and something will be done. That's my expectation. Otherwise, Bitcoin doesn't change. And for sure, Bitcoin is not changing to address some workarounds just for the projects to find new workarounds to store data and create inscriptions. That's not happening, and you rather fight that by policy. So yes, in the end, the chain split was inevitable, and we will see how the hard fork goes. And that's it. That's it for this video. I have more on Bitcoin. Again, post-quantum on transaction outputs. That's the next video I want to do. So yeah, I'll see you there. Thank you and bye-bye.